It begins not with an island, but with an echo, a tremor beneath the surface of collective memory. A world said to have flourished before time wore its familiar face, its name Atlantis, a name whispered by philosophers and dreamers, by explorers who charted the silence between myth and fact. Plato spoke of it as a warning, others as a remembrance. But what if neither was true? What if Atlantis was not a metaphor for pride, but a record, blurred, refracted through the shifting glass of ages, of something real? In the deep Atlantic, sonar traces reveal geometric patterns beneath layers of sediment. On mountaintops, once beneath the sea, structures carved with unknown precision emerge from the fog. In the oldest texts, Sumerian, Egyptian, Vedic, there are fragments that do not belong to their time. They speak of cities of the first dawn, of beings who understood stone as if it were language. Somewhere between myth and sediment, a possibility stirs, that our history may not be the first, but only the most recent. If civilization is a cycle, not a line, then perhaps what we call progress is merely memory returning. Perhaps Atlantis is not lost, only waiting to be remembered. Welcome to Archeon. If you're drawn to stories like these, the ones that live in the shadows between what we see and what was made to disappear, feel free to like and subscribe only if it feels right, and let me know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it for you right now? I love seeing our little map of watchers light up around the world. The sea keeps its secrets in the language of pressure and silence. Beneath miles of water, where light fades into a faint green pulse, lie shapes that do not belong to chance, patterns that seem deliberate, too measured to be the work of geology alone. It was in the late 1960s when sonar mapping of the Atlantic floor first revealed anomalies near the Azores that the idea of a lost continent was no longer confined to Plato's dialogues. The images were indistinct, blurred by the distortion of the deep. Yet they hinted at terraces, walls, and concentric structures, the kind Plato described in Timaeus and Critias. For a moment, science and myth stood face to face, unsure which was the reflection. But the ocean does not give up its memories easily. The official explanation was swift. Underwater volcanic formations, natural ridges, misunderstood data. Yet, as decades passed, more fragments emerged, a grid-like structure off Bimini, the ruins at Yonaguni, the submerged cities of Dwarka and Pavlopetri, all whispering of an age before the last ice melted, when sea levels were hundreds of feet lower. Could Atlantis have been one of those cities swallowed by rising tides, its story surviving only as legend? Or was it something older still, a memory of a civilization erased before ours even began? Geologists have long known that the Earth itself remembers differently than we do. In ice cores and magnetic shifts, in fossilized pollen and isotopic ratios, there are traces of catastrophic change, moments when climates flipped, oceans rose, and continents drowned. Around 12,800 years ago, at the boundary known as the Younger Dryas, the planet plunged suddenly into cold. Something struck, perhaps a comet, perhaps a chain of cosmic fragments, triggering floods and fires that ended an age. It was this same period, some say, when Atlantis was lost in a single night of misfortune. Is that coincidence, or the faint outline of truth beneath the allegory? When the first human settlements reappeared, Göbekli Tepe in Anatolia, Jericho in the Levant, the flooded ruins off India's coast. They appeared abruptly, as if civilization had restarted with memories too advanced for its supposed time. Stone circles, astronomical alignments, the knowledge of solstices and stellar precession, all emerging from what should have been the twilight of chaos. Did someone survive? Did the remnants of a forgotten world rebuild in fragments, carrying with them the faint echo of what Atlantis once knew? The Egyptian priest who told Solon of Atlantis spoke of an age before Egypt itself, a time when the great sea swallowed the land of the West. He said that humanity had been destroyed more than once by fire and water, and only those who remembered rebuilt. It is a pattern that repeats in every ancient story: the flood of Utnapishtim, the deluge of Deucalion, the fall of Lemuria, the destruction of Mu. Are these parallel myths, or a single wound told in many tongues? Perhaps Plato's account wasn't the beginning of the legend, but its final echo, carried from older civilizations whose ruins now lie beneath sand or sea. When divers in the 1990s explored the Yonaguni monument off Japan, they found terraces and stairways cut from solid sandstone, descending like the memory of a city half erased. Geologists argued natural formation, tectonic stress, erosion. But others pointed to tool marks, perfect angles, and carvings of fish and turtles whose symbolic style matched Jomon-era art, thousands of years before known civilizations in the region. The debate remains unresolved, but the image is haunting. An entire landscape sculpted beneath the waves, half architecture, half nature, like a message dissolving into water. Could such places be the footprints of that forgotten age? Across the Atlantic, in the Bahamas, explorers found the Bimini Road, massive limestone blocks forming a near-perfect linear path under shallow turquoise water. Skeptics called it beach rock, fractured by natural processes, yet magnetic anomalies and geometric alignment continue to provoke wonder. Edgar Cayce, the so-called sleeping prophet, had predicted that remnants of Atlantis would rise near Bimini around that very time. Coincidence or self-fulfilling myth? The line between them grows thin when belief and discovery follow the same horizon. But Atlantis, if it existed, would not have been merely a city. Plato described it as a maritime empire, ruled by kings descended from Poseidon, whose technology and moral decay brought about its fall. A poetic exaggeration, perhaps, or a metaphor for the rise and collapse of any great power. Yet fragments from other traditions describe something disturbingly similar. The Vedic accounts of flying machines and cosmic wars, the Sumerian epics of the Anunnaki and their engineered servants, the Olmec heads staring seaward with features foreign to their land, each speaks, in its own idiom, of a civilization that came before, radiant, proud, and undone by its own excess. Could these be refracted memories of one origin? Modern research into the Ice Age coastlines reveals that vast portions of habitable land now lie submerged, entire plains off the coasts of Europe, Asia, and the Americas. Doggerland, once connecting Britain to the continent, vanished beneath the North Sea around 6000 BCE. Sundaland, stretching from Indonesia to the South China Sea, was a tropical expanse lost to rising waters. In each region, ancient myths remember a flood, a disappearance, a golden land beneath the waves. The geological record confirms that such floods happened. What remains uncertain is whether something more, something conscious, advanced, and forgotten, once thrived there. If Atlantis was real, its traces may not be found in a single ruin, but scattered across the world's drowned margins, encoded in myths that survived through song and symbol. Perhaps it was never a single place, but a network, a shared civilization spanning oceans, built upon knowledge now lost. Ancient maps like the Piri Reis chart hint at coastlines drawn before Antarctica was covered in ice. How could 16th century sailors know what only modern satellites have revealed? Some say they copied from far older sources, atlases of the world as it once was. If so, who drew the originals? There are scholars who dismiss these patterns as romantic coincidence, the human desire to see design in chaos. Yet there is something undeniably human in that impulse, to believe that the past was not barren, that wisdom might precede us. Every discovery of an ancient mechanism, every alignment to the stars, every unexplained precision in stone seems to whisper of continuity, not invention. Maybe we have been here before, walking through the ashes of our own forgotten age. The philosopher René Guénon once wrote that time moves not in a line, but in a circle, that each cycle ends in dissolution, followed by rebirth. If so, Atlantis might be less a lost continent than a mirror of ourselves, a story of knowledge that outpaced wisdom, of power that turned inward and sank. Perhaps the question is not whether Atlantis existed, but whether we are living in its echo, repeating the same mistakes, building towers upon sand while the tides return. At night, in the silence between the pulse of machines, the sea still hums with unseen motion. Somewhere beneath that endless surface, stone sleeps beneath layers of silt, coral, and time. Instruments record faint magnetic whispers, patterns too orderly to be random, too ancient to ignore. It is as if the earth itself remembers something it cannot fully reveal, a name half erased, a memory half dreamed. Maybe Atlantis never sank. Maybe it was buried in us, in the collective memory of what humanity once was and what it might be again. And if one listens closely, beyond the static of history, perhaps the ocean still speaks, in the slow rhythm of its tides, of a world that learned too much, too soon. Night falls over the ruins of Santorini, and the sea glows faintly where the caldera meets the dark. Few places on Earth evoke the image of Atlantis as vividly as this island once known as Thera. Its shattered cliffs, carved into crescents by volcanic fury, look as though some immense hand had struck the world and left a wound that never healed. Archaeologists uncovered here a Bronze Age city, Akrotiri, preserved in ash like a Pompeii of the Aegean. Its frescoes depict fleets of ships, lilies, dolphins, and women adorned with intricate jewelry. No trace of war, no sign of decline, only beauty, frozen in an instant. The eruption that buried it around 1600 BCE was so vast that the sky darkened across continents. Waves swept through the Mediterranean, and entire cultures collapsed. Could this have been the disaster Plato described, distorted by centuries of retelling? Or was it merely one echo among many, part of a pattern of destruction that the earth repeats when civilization forgets its balance? Plato's timeline placed Atlantis 9,000 years before Solon, yet even then he hinted that such numbers might not be literal. Some scholars argue he meant lunar years, 1,000 years for each moon cycle, placing Atlantis closer to the time of Thera's fall. Others believe the priests of Sais, from whom Solon heard the tale, spoke of something far older, a world erased so completely that even the Egyptians, with their dynasties of stone, remembered it only as a whisper. It is here that the myth fractures, turning from archaeology to something older than record, the geography of memory. For if we step beyond the Mediterranean, other ruins tell a similar story. In the Andes, the walls of Sacsayhuaman curve with precision that defies explanation. Cyclopean stones, weighing hundreds of tons, interlock so perfectly that even a knife cannot pass between them. In Bolivia, at Tiwanaku and Pumapunku, stone blocks lie scattered like the remains of an impossible geometry. Some are cut with such accuracy that modern tools struggle to replicate them. The local legends speak of gods who descended from the sky and shaped the world before the Great Flood. Could they have been remnants of that same lost civilization, carrying with them a technology that seemed divine to those who survived? Across the ocean, beneath the sands of Egypt, the unfinished base of the Great Pyramid reveals marks of a technique beyond the reach of copper tools. Its alignment to true north, accurate within a fraction of a degree, still puzzles engineers. The Sphinx, weathered by millennia of rain that should not have fallen in that desert, may be older than history allows. Robert Schoch and John Anthony West once argued that its erosion patterns pointed to a construction date far before 2500 BCE, perhaps before 10,000 BCE, before the end of the last ice age. Their claim was ridiculed, yet the rock bears its testimony in silence. If true, who carved it? And what memory were they trying to preserve in the body of a lion facing the dawn? The story deepens when one follows the map of myths rather than nations. The Hopi speak of previous worlds destroyed by water and fire, and of survivors guided to safety by the ant people beneath the earth. The Maya recount ages of creation and collapse, each cycle ending in flood. The Egyptians told of Zep-Tepi, the first time when gods walked among men and built in alignment with the stars. And in Plato's account, Atlantis too fell when its people grew proud, when they lost the nobility of their nature and turned their science to conquest. Is this not the same story retold across continents, a civilization undone by its own brilliance, leaving behind fragments mistaken for miracles? When researchers mapped ancient megalithic sites worldwide, they noticed something uncanny. Many align along a single great circle, a line that runs through Easter Island, the Nazca Plateau, the pyramids of Giza, Petra, Mohenjo-Daro, and Angkor Wat. Coincidence, perhaps, or a mathematical illusion. Yet some argue this alignment could mark the remnants of a forgotten geodetic network, a global system of measurement far beyond what Bronze Age cultures should have known. If true, who first drew this invisible line around the Earth? Others look upward rather than across. Astronomers and mythographers point out that many ancient monuments align not merely with the sun, but with constellations, Orion, Sirius, the Pleiades. In Plato's text, Atlantis worshipped Poseidon, god of the sea, but the layout of his temple, circular and concentric, mirrors cosmic order. The Egyptians aligned their pyramids with Orion's belt, the Maya with the movements of Venus, the Sumerians with the paths of the stars. Everywhere, the heavens repeat themselves in stone. Perhaps these builders were not copying the sky for worship, but remembering a knowledge of cycles, precession, magnetic shifts, cosmic impacts that only a civilization older than the last cataclysm could have known. What if the Atlanteans were not gods, but scientists of a forgotten age? A people who understood resonance and geometry as languages of the earth itself. Theories suggest that certain ancient sites, pyramids, stone circles, dolmens are tuned to the planet's natural frequencies, amplifying sound and electromagnetic fields. At Malta's hypogum, visitors report vibrations that induce trance-like states. At the Great Pyramid, the King's Chamber resonates at a frequency of 440 Hz, the same used in modern music tuning. Could these places have been more than tombs? Could they have been instruments, harmonizing the Earth's energy, perhaps even stabilizing something we no longer perceive? To the rational mind, these are fantasies. Archaeology demands evidence, not echoes. Yet the evidence that does exist, the unexplained precision, the shared symbolism, the sudden emergence of civilization, suggests that humanity remembers more than it admits. The philosopher Heraclitus once said that the hidden harmony is better than the visible. Perhaps that hidden harmony lies in the rhythms of catastrophe and renewal, the pulse of civilizations rising and sinking like the breath of the sea. If Atlantis once stood, its people may have looked upon the stars not for wonder, but for warning. Some modern researchers, from Graham Hancock to Randall Carlson, propose that ancient myths encode astronomical data, records of cometary paths, of sky fires that once devastated the Earth. They argue that temples, pyramids, and even myths of divine punishment were memory systems, ways of preserving knowledge across epochs. The destruction of Atlantis, in this view, was not divine retribution, but cosmic accident, a collision written into the heavens and remembered in parables. There is a strange comfort in that idea, that myth is not illusion, but survival, that when civilizations fall, they do not vanish. They whisper forward through time, hidden in architecture, in ritual, in story. Each era believes itself first, yet it builds upon invisible ruins. The Atlanteans, if they ever lived, might have done the same, carrying the embers of an older fire, passing them to those who would rebuild after them. Perhaps that is why we still search the ocean floor, not for stones, but for memory. The wind shifts over the Aegean. The waves, like breath drawn and released, carry the faint scent of sulfur from Thera's heart. In the distance, lights shimmer across the caldera, reflections of modern cities built upon ancient ash. Beneath them, the ghosts of Akrotiri dream in silence, frescoes still bright beneath the dust. They are not Atlantis, and yet in their stillness, they feel like an echo of it, a civilization advanced for its time, erased in a single eruption, remembered only in fragments. What then truly defines a lost civilization, its absence or our refusal to remember it? Every age buries its own Atlantis in the depths of its forgetting, in the arrogance that believes the present is the pinnacle. Perhaps the story is not about where Atlantis was, but when, a lesson buried in the rhythm of time itself. Somewhere between Thera's ash and Plato's allegory, between myth and sediment, something persists, a voice half buried, half heard. It speaks not of gods or kings, but of cycles, of rise and fall, of pride and humility, of knowledge and loss. And if one listens long enough, past the hum of the sea and the noise of certainty, that voice seems to whisper a single question. What if we are not discovering Atlantis, but remembering it? The night sky holds patterns older than any kingdom. Before the first city walls were raised, before writing carved memory into clay, humans watched the heavens for meaning. The stars were their maps, their calendar, their archive. And within those constellations lies another kind of story, one not written in words but in alignments, in cycles of catastrophe and rebirth. When Plato described Atlantis as existing beyond the Pillars of Heracles, many assumed he meant the Strait of Gibraltar. But what if he meant not a location, but an epoch? The word beyond might have referred to time, not geography, to a world before recorded history, when the sky itself looked different. Long before telescopes, ancient priests tracked the slow drift of the stars. They noticed that the rising of constellations shifted over millennia, what we now call the precession of the equinoxes. This 26,000-year cycle became sacred across cultures: the Hindu yugas, the Mayan long count, the Egyptian Zep Tepi. Each marks a great turning of the heavens, a cosmic clock measuring not years but ages. Could the memory of Atlantis belong to a previous age of that clock, a world lost at the turning of time itself? The first anomaly lies in the stars. Around 10,500 BCE, Orion's belt aligned perfectly with the three pyramids of Giza, not as they appear now, but as they were positioned in the sky then. The Sphinx faced directly toward Leo, as though greeting the dawn of that age. The builders of these monuments, whoever they were, seemed to encode the heavens of another era. Graham Hancock and Robert Bauval argued that this alignment was intentional, that the Egyptians were not the originators, but the inheritors of knowledge from a lost civilization that remembered the sky as it was 12,000 years ago. Mainstream Egyptology rejects this, yet the alignment remains mathematically undeniable. Was this mere coincidence or evidence of continuity across an impossible gulf of time? Far from Egypt, the same stellar logic appears again. At Teotihuacan, in Mexico, the layout of the pyramids of the sun and moon mirrors the same pattern as Orion's belt. At Angkor Wat, in Cambodia, the towers correspond to the constellation of Draco during the same epoch. Across continents, separated by oceans, cultures that supposedly never met built monuments that mirror one another, all pointing to the same celestial geometry, all recalling an age long before theirs. If not by contact, then by inheritance, fragments of a memory too ancient to name. Ancient myths seem to agree. The Egyptians spoke of Thoth, the keeper of wisdom, who reigned before the flood and taught men the measurement of the heavens. The Sumerians told of Oannes, the fishman who rose from the sea to teach writing and science. The Greeks remembered Prometheus, who brought fire to mankind and was punished for it. Different names, different lands, yet the same archetype. The bringer of forgotten knowledge, emerging from water, always punished for his gift. Could this figure represent the survivors of Atlantis, scientists or sages preserving fragments of a world undone? The flood itself, too, is everywhere. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, Utnapishtim survives the deluge sent to erase mankind. In Genesis, Noah builds his ark. In the Popol Vuh of the Maya, the gods wash away the wooden people who failed to worship them. In each version, a few are saved to rebuild, the bearers of memory. Even the numbers repeat. 40 days of rain, 12 survivors, a mountain rising from the sea. Myth is not mathematics, yet patterns so persistent suggest a common origin. If Atlantis perished in such a flood, what remains of it today? The answer may lie not only beneath the sea, but within the genes of humanity. Geneticists have discovered that around 12,000 years ago, precisely when the Younger Dryas event occurred, there was a sudden expansion of human populations, particularly in coastal and equatorial regions. Mitochondrial DNA studies trace these lineages to a few surviving groups that spread rapidly, bringing with them agriculture, language, and art. Was this the beginning of civilization or its restoration? Consider the legend of the Tuatha De Danann of Ireland, luminous beings said to have arrived from islands beyond the Western Sea. They possessed technology so advanced it seemed magical, weapons that glowed, cities that floated in mist. When they were defeated, they vanished underground, becoming the fair folk of Celtic myth. In Central America, the god Quetzalcoatl departed eastward across the ocean, promising to return. In Mesopotamia, the Apkallu, half-human, half-fish sages, emerged from the sea to teach humanity the laws of civilization. Each story begins the same way. Something lost returns, bearing knowledge. Something drowned sends emissaries to the survivors. Even the oldest stone speaks of this pattern. Göbekli Tepe, in the hills of Turkey, dates to around 9600 BCE, the very threshold of the Younger Dryas. Its pillars are carved with foxes, vultures, and abstract symbols whose meaning remains unknown. Yet when decoded astronomically, they appear to mark constellations and record a cosmic impact, perhaps the very event that ended the last age. It is as if its builders sought to preserve a warning in stone, that the heavens can destroy as easily as they create. The deeper one looks, the less Atlantis seems a place, and the more it feels like a cycle, a repeating dream of human ascent and collapse. Every civilization, from Sumer to Rome, has imagined a golden age before history, when knowledge and harmony were one. The Greeks called it the Age of Kronos, the Hindus, Satya Yuga. Each ends in corruption and flood. Each begins again from the ashes. Perhaps Atlantis was simply the name Plato gave to the last time this happened, when humanity rose too high and was humbled by the sea. But if that is true, the evidence must still exist, if not in stone, then in pattern. Take, for instance, the mysterious Piri Reis map of 1513. Drawn on gazelle skin by a Turkish admiral, it shows the coastlines of Europe, Africa, and South America with uncanny accuracy, centuries before their official discovery. More astonishingly, it depicts Antarctica ice-free, its mountains and rivers matching modern seismic data. How could a map from the Renaissance include features buried under 2 miles of ice? Scholars propose that it was copied from far older charts, relics of a civilization that mapped the world before the poles froze, perhaps before Atlantis sank. The deeper question is not how Atlantis fell, but why the story endures. Myths fade when they serve no function. Atlantis persists because it touches something essential, the fear that progress contains its own undoing. The Atlanteans, Plato said, grew proud and sought to conquer the whole world. Their technology, once sacred, turned to hubris. The gods struck them down not out of wrath, but to restore balance. Is that not the rhythm of all civilizations? From Babylon to the Cold War, from empire to machine, the same tide repeats. Knowledge rising faster than wisdom, followed by collapse. Perhaps the reason we search for Atlantis is that we recognize ourselves in its mirror. Our satellites trace coastlines as the Atlanteans might once have done. Our cities gleam across the night like constellations reborn. We have learned to split the atom, to touch the stars. And yet the ice melts, the storms grow, the seas rise again. History repeats, not because we forget, but because we remember imperfectly. Somewhere in the dark of the Atlantic, seismic echoes move through water, bouncing off something vast buried beneath silt. Patterns emerge, dismissed as coincidence, then rediscovered by another generation. Each time we map the ocean floor, we draw closer to memory, not proof, but recognition. Perhaps one day, machines will descend into those depths and find columns of stone, inscriptions half erased by salt. Or perhaps they will find nothing but natural ridges and the ghost of an idea. Either way, Atlantis will remain, not as geography, but as prophecy. For every myth that refuses to die hides a truth not yet understood. Maybe Atlantis is not a lost civilization at all, but a reminder written into the human spirit that creation and destruction are inseparable, that every rise carries its fall within it. The sea does not punish, it cleanses, and when it takes, it also gives new land, new life, new stories waiting to begin. If the stars mark the rhythm of ages, then perhaps another turning approaches. The procession moves, the poles wander, the climate stirs. The same celestial clock that ended the last world begins to chime again. Whether we heed its warning or not is another matter. For in the vast silence between one age and the next, the ocean waits, not in anger, but in memory. And somewhere in that silence, beneath the shifting constellations, a question lingers like a heartbeat beneath the sea. When the waters rise once more, will we remember who we were? Morning comes softly over the ruins of the Yucatan, and mist drifts through the limestone temples as though the forest itself still breathes with memory. Beneath the roots of cheba trees lie cities swallowed by time. Palenque, Tikal, Calakmul, once radiant with rituals that mapped the heavens and the earth. The Maya did not speak of Atlantis, yet their cosmology carries its rhythm, cycles of destruction and renewal, worlds created and lost, suns extinguished and reborn. In their Popol Vuh, each creation ended in failure. Wooden people washed away, stone beings silenced by their own blindness, until finally the fourth world rose, the one we now inhabit. But they warned that even this age would one day fall, as all ages do. It is not the end that frightens them, but forgetting. Perhaps that is the truest echo of Atlantis, not a lost continent, but a lost memory of how fragile civilization truly is. In the 1930s, explorers in Mesoamerica unearthed a stone carving now known as the Palenque astronaut. It depicts King Pakal descending into what some interpret as a machine, surrounded by symbols of fire and celestial movement. To Orthodox scholars, it is a representation of his journey to the underworld. But to others, engineers, theorists, dreamers, it looks eerily like a spacecraft, complete with propulsion and control panels. Erich von Däniken made it famous in Chariots of the Gods, claiming it as proof of extraterrestrial contact. Yet perhaps the truth is simpler and stranger. Maybe the Maya were remembering not visitors from the stars, but knowledge from a civilization that once looked upward with equal mastery, the same sky watchers who mapped the procession long before recorded time. The pattern repeats. From Egypt to India, from Bolivia to Easter Island, the oldest monuments are often the most sophisticated. The precision decreases over time, as though the builders inherited skills they could not fully replicate. Archaeologists call it diffusion. Mystics call it memory. The Atlantean hypothesis calls it survival. If a civilization perished at the end of the last ice age, its refugees may have scattered to the Andes, to the Nile, to the Indus Valley, carrying fragments of geometry, astronomy, and myth. Over generations, those fragments became temples, calendars, and gods. The names changed, but the pulse remained. Consider the Olmec heads, colossal basalt sculptures, each distinct, each bearing features that seem to come from far beyond Mesoamerica. Their origin remains uncertain. The tools required to carve and transport them, some weighing over 40 tons, are not found among Olmec relics. Were these the portraits of rulers, or something older, a remembrance of teachers who came from the sea? In local legend, they were men of great knowledge who taught the arts of time and number. The same phrase appears in Egypt in reference to Thoth, the same in Sumer describing the Apkallu, and again in India, where the 7 rishis brought sacred geometry from across the ocean. How can so many myths describe the same archetype, 7 sages, luminous, emerging from water after a great flood? Perhaps they are not separate stories, but a single thread, woven through the tapestry of time. In 2002, sonar scans in the Gulf of Cambay, off India's western coast, revealed an underwater city stretching 5 miles long. Among the silt and coral, divers recovered pottery, stone tools, and hearths carbon-dated to nearly 9,000 years old, centuries before the Indus Valley civilization. The find was largely dismissed, the data questioned, yet if even partially true, it suggests the existence of organized life during the time Plato ascribed to Atlantis. The Indian texts speak of Dwarka, the golden city of Krishna, which vanished beneath the waves after a celestial war. Its rediscovery, however incomplete, feels like a whisper from another epoch, a reminder that myth and archaeology are merely 2 halves of the same forgotten story. The more one follows these coincidences, the more the world begins to look like a palimpsest, layers of civilization written over one another, faintly visible beneath the newer ink. When Plato wrote that Atlantis lay in front of the mouth, which you call the Pillars of Heracles, he may have been describing not a continent but a civilization that once circled the globe, bound by ocean routes long before we redrew them. The Phoenicians, the Polynesians, even the Basque people carry genetic and linguistic traces of ancient maritime migrations whose origins have no clear record. Could the Atlanteans have been master navigators, the first global culture whose memory persists in the scattered islands of our myths? The ocean, after all, connects more than it divides. The trade winds that carried canoes to Polynesia could as easily have carried ships westward from Africa. The currents that pull from Gibraltar to the Caribbean have not changed in tens of thousands of years. In 1970, Thor Heyerdahl proved that reed boats, built with techniques from ancient Egypt, could cross the Atlantic. His Ratu expedition, once dismissed as fantasy, showed that contact was possible long before Columbus. If it could be done by experiment in the 20th century, why not by knowledge in the 10th millennium BCE? But if Atlantis once spanned the seas, where did its heart lie? Some point to the Azores, where submerged plateaus hint at vanished land. Others to the Caribbean, to Cuba's mysterious underwater formations mapped by sonar in 2001, what appear to be massive pyramidal structures lying nearly 2,000 feet below the surface. Photographs are few, data sparse, yet the geometry persists: right angles, terraces, corridors. Marine geologist Paulina Zilitsky described them as the remains of a metropolis. Others dismissed her findings as natural formations. And still the question lingers: how many natural formations can align so precisely with the architecture of myth? Perhaps the truth is that no single site can contain the legend. Atlantis may have been an idea spread across epochs, the culmination of a knowledge system rooted in harmony with Earth's frequencies, lost when that harmony was broken. Modern researchers studying geomagnetism note that many ancient sites stand upon nodes of intense telluric activity, intersections of the planet's electromagnetic field. Whether intentional or accidental, these alignments suggest a sensitivity to forces long forgotten. The pyramids of Giza, the temples of Teotihuacan, Stonehenge, Machu Picchu all resonate with measurable frequencies. Could Atlantis have been a civilization attuned to these energies, understanding that the planet itself was alive, and that imbalance could bring its undoing? If that sounds like mysticism, consider how science begins to circle the same truths. Quantum field theory speaks of resonance and vibration. Geophysics reveals that Earth hums at 783 Hz, the Schumann resonance. Some studies suggest human brainwaves sync naturally to that frequency during states of calm or meditation. The ancients built chambers where sound amplified at those very tones. Coincidence or continuity? Perhaps what we call spiritual was once empirical, a technology of balance, not worship. Then came the forgetting. When ice melted, coastlines vanished. Earthquakes rewrote geography. Survivors fled inland, carrying fragments of a science that became myth. Over time, precision turned to ritual, instruments to idols. Knowledge became faith, and faith became story. Yet deep within those stories, the pattern endured, the sea rising, the stars shifting, the voice of a drowned age whispering through dreams. The poet Hesiod wrote that after the Golden Age came the silver, then the bronze, and finally the iron, each more corrupt, more divided from the divine. But perhaps these ages were not moral judgments at all, but descriptions of real celestial cycles, of light and memory waxing and waning like the moon. In that sense, we are the Iron Age, the farthest from remembrance, yet also nearest to rediscovery. Each technological leap we make, mapping the ocean floor, decoding DNA, studying ancient vibrations, is a fragment of that lost awareness resurfacing. We are rebuilding, unknowingly, what was once known. Still, Atlantis eludes us. It remains both everywhere and nowhere, a reflection across time. For some, it is merely a parable about pride. For others, a riddle written by gods. But perhaps it is something quieter, the Earth's way of reminding us that civilization is a tide, not a tower. It comes and goes, shaped by the breath of the planet, by its pulse beneath the crust. The Atlanteans, if they existed, were not destroyed by anger but by rhythm, the same rhythm that now hums beneath our cities, waiting, patient as the sea. The wind moves through the jungle, carrying the scent of limestone and rain. Somewhere, beneath the roots and dust, an inscription sleeps, unread, unfinished. A pattern carved into stone that aligns with the stars, marking the moment when time turned. The sun climbs higher, shadows shorten, and for a brief instant the world feels poised between memory and forgetting. Perhaps every civilization, at its height, stands upon that same edge, one breath away from the sea that will reclaim it. The Maya felt it, the Egyptians too, and maybe the Atlanteans before them. Not a curse, but a rhythm. The same song, replaying through ages, until one day it will fall silent again. When that day comes, will our monuments, of steel, of glass, of code, vanish as theirs did, leaving only questions behind? And if another world rises after ours, will it too look upon the ocean and ask the same question, half in awe, half in fear? What came before us? And what, in the silence, still remembers? There are places on earth where time seems to stand still, where the air is heavy with silence, and the stones remember things that history has forgotten. One such place lies deep in the Andes, in the high winds of Peru, where the ruins of Puma Punku rest like scattered puzzle pieces on the Altiplano. The stones here do not merely lie in ruin, they are sliced, drilled, and fitted with an accuracy that defies both bronze and iron. Some are carved with interlocking grooves so precise that even modern engineers have struggled to replicate them with hand tools. Each block weighs tens of tons, yet they are placed as though by an invisible geometry. To the Aymara people, who trace their ancestry to this plateau, Puma Punku wasn't built by ordinary men. It was the work of the Viracocha, the bearded god who came from the sea after a great flood, carrying light and knowledge. When his task was done, he vanished across the western ocean. The same direction, always the same, westward, toward the drowned memory of the world. Standing among those stones, one senses a stillness beyond archaeology. The angles, the alignment, the seamlessness of their joins, all speak of an intelligence that understood both material and vibration. Some researchers have proposed that these megaliths were shaped through acoustic resonance, using sound to fracture and levitate stone. Others, like the engineer Christopher Dunn, have suggested that ancient builders employed advanced machining methods now lost to time. Mainstream archaeology rejects both ideas, yet no definitive explanation has ever been proven. The site's age remains contested. Tiwanaku nearby is dated around 400 CE, but geomagnetic data hints at much older foundations buried beneath layers of sediment, perhaps 10,000 years old, perhaps older still. If true, it would place Puma Punku at the threshold of the same epoch Plato assigned to Atlantis. But to understand Atlantis, one must look not only at ruins, but at the pattern beneath them. Across the planet, the oldest structures seem to have been built with the same silent knowledge, the same astronomical alignments, the same geometric ratios. From the pyramids to Stonehenge, from the ziggurats of Sumer to the step pyramids of Mesoamerica, the numbers repeat. The golden ratio, pi, the precession of the equinoxes encoded in stone. It is as if these builders, separated by oceans, spoke a common mathematical tongue. The Atlantean hypothesis suggests this was not coincidence, but inheritance, the fragments of a global science once shared before the flood. In the archives of old civilizations, memory lingers in myth. The ancient Egyptians spoke of Zep Tepi, the first time when gods ruled and taught men to build in harmony with the stars. The Dogon of Mali preserve oral teachings of a star system invisible to the naked eye, Sirius A, and its companion, Sirius B, knowledge only confirmed by modern telescopes in the 20th century. How could they have known? Some claim contact with celestial beings. Others say they inherited knowledge from an earlier epoch, one whose understanding of the cosmos was lost after the sea rose. The same motif reappears in Babylon, where Oans emerged from the Persian Gulf to teach writing and astronomy. Always water, always knowledge, always loss. Perhaps these gods were not divine, but survivors. In every flood myth, a few are saved, the keepers of wisdom who seed the next age. The Atlanteans may have been the last of a civilization whose science bordered on magic, who understood that matter and energy were one and the same. In their fall, they became legends, transformed by the awe of those who came after into beings of light, of fish scales, of feathers. What survives of their legacy is not their cities, but their symbols, spirals, serpents, eyes, recurring in every corner of the ancient world. The serpent, especially, coiled in Egypt as the uraeus, carved in Mesoamerica as Quetzalcoatl, entwined around the caduceus of Greece, the symbol of knowledge, of cycles, of creation devouring itself. In the shadows of this continuity lies another mystery, one that turns Atlantis from a story into a warning. Geological records show that around 12,800 years ago, Earth experienced sudden, devastating change. The younger Dryas boundary, marked by a thin layer of platinum and nanodiamonds found across continents, suggests a massive impact event, perhaps fragments of a disintegrating comet striking the ice sheets of North America. The result? Floods, wildfires, a plunge into near-glacial cold. In a single generation, species vanished, coastlines shifted, and sea levels rose hundreds of feet. This was the world's reset, the moment when an earlier chapter of civilization could have been wiped clean. If Atlantis perished then, it was not by divine wrath but cosmic accident. Yet perhaps the ancients saw divinity in that destruction. For to them, the cosmos and the gods were one. The flood became a moral allegory, the heavens a language of cause and effect. Plato's tale, then, might be less invention than translation, an attempt to render celestial catastrophe in human terms. The gods punished Atlantis because the heavens punished Earth, and the survivors, in rebuilding, carried the story as a reminder until even that warning was half forgotten. The ocean's floor holds silence like a vault. In recent decades, deep-sea mapping has revealed ridges, terraces, and buried plateaus that hint at lost coastlines. Off the coast of Cuba, researchers discovered symmetrical formations nearly a mile beneath the surface, massive blocks arranged in grid-like order spanning several square miles. Some dismissed them as natural formations, others saw the outline of a city. The truth remains submerged, inaccessible. Yet the more the ocean gives up, the more its secrets resemble myth. Perhaps Atlantis is not a single location, but a mosaic of memories scattered across the world's drowned edges. In the deserts of Egypt, some scholars now study the remnants of a structure known as the Rings of the Eye, the Rishat structure in Mauritania. From the air, it looks eerily like Plato's description of Atlantis, concentric circles of land and water surrounded by mountains to the north, open to the sea to the south. Satellite imagery shows geological evidence of ancient waterways once flowing there. Though mainstream science calls it a natural dome, some researchers wonder if the geological form might have inspired the legend itself, or if a city once stood within its rings, erased by the slow violence of time. Wherever it lies, Atlantis remains a mirror. To search for it is to search for ourselves, for the part of humanity that once knew harmony with the world and lost it. The philosopher Proclus, writing 1,000 years after Plato, quoted an even older source that claimed Egyptian temples preserved records of the sunken land, written in stone long before Solon's time. If so, then Atlantis was not myth to them, but history. Yet to us it has become the perfect myth, one that can never be proven because it is not only about the past, but about recurrence. Every age has its Atlantis, and every fall is a reflection of that first one. The irony is that we are becoming what we seek, Our satellites map the same Earth once mapped by gods. Our machines harness forces once attributed to the divine. We build cities that shine across the night like constellations, and yet the same sea rises once more. Ice melts in Greenland, islands vanish in the Pacific. The flood returns, not as punishment, but as cycle. History moves not forward, but in spirals, like the serpent swallowing its tail. What if Atlantis was not destroyed, but transformed, reborn through us? If knowledge is cyclical, then every discovery we make is a rediscovery. The energy we extract, the atoms we split, the networks we weave, all echoes of an understanding once held and then lost. Perhaps what sank beneath the waves was not merely stone, but wisdom. And now, as we stand again on the edge of global change, we begin to remember, faintly, like the glimmer of a city seen through fog. At dusk, the wind moves through the ruins of Pumapunku, sighing through hollow chambers of stone. The air trembles softly, as if the rocks themselves hum with forgotten frequency. Far to the west, the Pacific stretches endless and dark, swallowing the sun in crimson light. Somewhere beyond that horizon, an island once stood, or still stands, beneath the sea, waiting for its memory to surface. Maybe we will never find Atlantis because it cannot be found. It must be recalled, not through excavation, but through recognition. It is the pattern that repeats when humanity forgets how to listen to the planet, when pride drowns humility, when knowledge outpaces wisdom. The sea, in its patience, reminds us. And so, as night settles over the Andes and the first stars bloom above the horizon, one question returns, soft as wind against stone. If Atlantis fell once by its own brilliance, how close are we to following it into the deep? The ocean, it is said, has no memory. Yet in the stillness between tides, it murmurs of things that once were, of mountains now drowned, of forests buried under salt and silt. Beneath the surface of the Atlantic, between the Azores and the Canary Islands, lie scars invisible to the naked eye. Ridges, trenches, and plateaus that whisper of something that broke, something that sank. To geologists, these are natural fractures, the restless shifting of tectonic plates. But to those who listen differently, they sound like the echoes of a continent that once stood above the waves. In the early 20th century, seafloor maps drawn from magnetic data began to show strange formations, long symmetrical ridges extending like veins across the mid-Atlantic. In 1949, British scientist Maurice Ewing led an expedition aboard the Atlantis, the research vessel of the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. Deep beneath the waves, his team dredged up rocks that should not have been there, pieces of granite, a type of stone that forms only on land. It was an anomaly. The Atlantic seafloor was thought to consist solely of basalt, born from volcanic rifts. Granite suggested something else, a memory of land now gone. Mainstream science explained it away as continental debris carried by glacial or volcanic processes, yet the coincidence was haunting. The ship's name, the Atlantis, seemed almost too symbolic, as if the ocean had chosen that moment to remind us. Decades later, more fragments would be found, traces of ancient beaches, coral reefs thousands of feet below their natural depth, pollen from land plants embedded in marine sediment, each a whisper, a fossil of a shoreline that no longer exists. But perhaps the strangest evidence lies not beneath the water, but in the myths of the people who have always lived beside it. From the Berbers of North Africa to the Basques of Spain, From the Celts of Ireland to the Dogon of Mali, stories persist of islands that sank, lands of knowledge and light devoured by the sea. The Basque word Atlantica still carries echoes of the lost West. The Irish High Brazil, said to appear once every 7 years off the coast of Galway, vanishes as suddenly as it emerges. The Moroccan legend of Antillia speaks of a realm ruled by 7 wise kings beyond the ocean. Always the same pattern: 7 rulers, 7 islands, and a sudden disappearance. It is as if each culture inherited a shard of the same catastrophe, each retelling the loss in its own tongue. In 1968, a pilot flying near Bimini in the Bahamas noticed a series of rectangular formations under shallow water. Divers later confirmed them, giant limestone blocks forming a nearly straight path stretching hundreds of meters, now called the Bimini Road. To some, it was the remnant of an ancient harbor wall. To others, merely a natural fracture in beach rock. Yet magnetic readings in the area revealed anomalies, energy fields inconsistent with the surrounding seabed. When Edgar Cayce, decades earlier, had predicted that the first portion of Atlantis would rise near Bimini in the late 1960s, believers saw the discovery as confirmation. Scientists dismissed it, but the timing was uncanny. Further north, off the coast of Portugal, fishermen sometimes speak of strange stone shapes glimpsed through clear water on calm days: walls, stairs, columns. In 2013, sonar scans near the Azores revealed a massive pyramid-like structure on the ocean floor, aligned perfectly with the cardinal directions. Portuguese Navy sources later downplayed the finding, but images circulated nonetheless, a shadow of symmetry in the deep. Was it illusion, geological coincidence, or one more piece of a puzzle too vast to see whole? The temptation, of course, is to believe. Atlantis is the perfect myth, half science, half dream. It offers a narrative of both grandeur and ruin, a reflection of human longing for origin and warning. But beneath the poetry lies a harder question. Why does this story persist across time and culture, if not because something within it is true? Even those who reject the idea of a literal Atlantis acknowledge the geological truth. The end of the last ice age drowned vast portions of land. Continental shelves that once hosted forests, rivers, and human settlements now lie beneath hundreds of feet of water. Archaeologists have begun to call them submerged prehistories. Doggerland beneath the North Sea, Sunda Shelf beneath Southeast Asia, the Gulf of Cambay in India, all lost worlds rediscovered by sonar. Atlantis may simply be their composite memory, a myth born from 1,000 drownings. Yet there is a strange intelligence to the myth itself. In Plato's dialogues, Atlantis was not only a city of stone, but a moral equation, a civilization that reached beyond its measure and fell. Its people, blessed with divine heritage, turned their brilliance to conquest. They mastered the forces of nature, harnessed energy, built wonders beyond their age, and in doing so, forgot the balance that sustains all creation. Their fall, Plato wrote, was the punishment of hubris. Whether he invented the story or transmitted an older truth, the symbolism endures. Every age of human achievement seems to circle the same spiral: invention, pride, imbalance, collapse. Some modern thinkers have reinterpreted Atlantis not as a place, but as a phase, a level of consciousness, an age of human unity before the fragmentation of history. Theosophists like Helena Blavatsky spoke of Atlantean races, beings who communicated through vibration and color rather than speech, whose downfall came from misuse of psychic energy. Such claims sound fantastical, yet behind their mysticism lies a consistent motif. Knowledge divorced from humility leads to ruin. Whether that knowledge was metaphysical or technological may not matter. The warning is the same. And still, traces of impossible knowledge persist. Ancient maps, like the Orontius-Phineus chart of 1531, show Antarctica not only free of ice, but accurately contoured, as though drawn from aerial view. Modern science did not confirm such topography until 1958. How could 16th-century mapmakers know what was hidden beneath miles of ice? The map's creators insisted they compiled them from older sources. Could these have been the relics of an Atlantean world map, preserved through ages by seafarers? If so, the story of Atlantis may be less a fable than a memory encoded in cartography. There are moments when the myth feels uncomfortably close. Our satellites now do what Plato's gods once did: observe from above, record the changing of the seas. The ice retreats, the oceans rise. Cities built on coasts begin to fear the very element that once gave them life. Perhaps we are living, unknowingly, the closing act of another cycle. Perhaps Atlantis is not only our past, but our mirror. In the Canary Islands, local legends tell of a kingdom that vanished beneath waves after a star fell from heaven. Geologists confirm that these islands were once part of a massive volcanic ridge, some peaks collapsing catastrophically into the sea. Could one such event have inspired the memory of a continent's fall? The speed of volcanic destruction, the roar of waves, the red light of molten rock, to the eyes of survivors, such an apocalypse would appear divine. What they saw as God's wrath may have been the Earth's own convulsion. And yet, there is beauty in the thought that something remains. Not ruins of stone, but vibrations of remembrance. Just as coral grows over the skeletons of ancient reefs, human consciousness builds over its own ruins. We are the living architecture of forgotten worlds. The myths we inherit are not errors, but codes, fragmented languages through which the past continues to speak. If Atlantis was real, it may never return in form. But perhaps it returns in pattern, each time humanity nears the edge of its own brilliance. We reach for the stars, as they once did. We split atoms, decode genomes, dream of immortality. The ocean waits. The story repeats. In the deep Atlantic, sonar pings echo into silence. Machines map the unseen, and in their cold precision lies a kind of reverence, a desire to know what the water hides. Some say the ocean forgets. Others believe it remembers everything, just differently. Pressure, depth, and time are its language. Perhaps one day, when we learn to listen not with instruments but with humility, we will understand what it has been saying all along. And so, in the vastness between continents, amid currents that have circled the planet since before history began, a question drifts, ancient as the tide, quiet as breath. Is Atlantis truly gone, or have we simply forgotten how to see beneath the surface of our own reflection? Night falls on the Sahara like a tide of dust. From the air, the desert appears endless, yet hidden beneath its dunes are the bones of rivers, lakes, and forests long turned to sand. In Mauritania, at the heart of this ocean of stone, lies a formation that seems almost too perfect for nature alone, the Eye of the Sahara or the Richat structure. From space, it resembles a colossal spiral, a set of concentric rings nearly 40 kilometers across. Its symmetry is uncanny. Circular plateaus surrounded by low walls with openings towards the southwest where ancient water channels once flowed. To those who believe in Atlantis, the Rishat structure is no mere geological curiosity. It is the ghost of a map, a mirror of the city Plato described, etched not in myth, but in stone. Plato's Atlantis, he wrote, was composed of 3 rings of water and 2 of land, with a central island where the royal palace stood. The land around it was fertile, rich with metals, rivers, and plains. The sea to the south gave access to the world beyond, while mountains to the north sheltered it from cold winds. These details, long dismissed as allegory, align with uncanny precision to the Richard's geography. Even the geological age fits a window of possibility. Erosion studies show that water once coursed through this region between 11,000 and 15,000 years ago, just when the last ice age waned and the cataclysm of the younger Dryas reshaped the planet. Skeptics insist that the Rishat structure is natural, a volcanic dome eroded by wind and time. Yet its near-perfect circularity, its alignment with ancient riverbeds, and its vast diameter invite questions that geology alone cannot silence. Could an ancient culture have chosen this place, already shaped by nature, and refined it into their own sacred geometry? Could the myth of Atlantis have originated not from the ocean, but from a desert that was once green? For millennia, the Sahara has not always been dry. Every 20,000 years, Earth's wobble shifts monsoon patterns, turning the desert into savanna. Fossilized hippos and fish skeletons lie buried beneath its sands. Satellite imagery reveals the remnants of ancient shorelines, and radar mapping has traced river systems now invisible. Once, this region teemed with life. If an advanced civilization had arisen here, its traces could have been erased as swiftly as they were built. Sand buries faster than water, and silence, more than the sea, can erase memory. Local Berber traditions speak of a land of giants, of kings who built circular fortresses of stone and gold. Some elders of the nomadic tribes still tell of Chinguetti, the city of 1,000 libraries, said to hold manuscripts describing a world before the desert. Archaeologists have recovered some of these texts, astronomical treatises, maps of stars, records of rainfall cycles thousands of years old. In their margins, there are faint references to the Western Sea, to lands that vanished, to a kingdom lost to the deep. Coincidence, perhaps, or the last echoes of a civilization that once stretched beyond the horizon of what we call history. Further north, in the Atlas Mountains of Morocco, petroglyphs show ships with sails carved into the rock, alongside giraffes and elephants, evidence that these highlands once overlooked navigable waters. How could ancient artists have known of boats if no seas existed here? Perhaps once they did. Perhaps the Atlantic in Atlantis referred not to the ocean as we know it, but to a vast inland sea that vanished as the Sahara dried. The word itself, Atlas, belongs to these mountains. Plato's account may have been not an invention of the Aegean, but a memory transmitted through Egypt from this very land, an echo of Africa remembering its drowned heart. The Egyptians always spoke of their knowledge as inherited, not discovered. Their priests told Solon that their civilization was but a remnant, a survivor of the great flood that destroyed those before them. "You Greeks," they said, "are but children. You have no ancient belief, no old knowledge preserved." It was in their temple of Sais that the story of Atlantis was first recorded, and Sais itself lay near the delta, once connected by trade routes to the western Sahara. If we follow that trail backward, through the silence of dunes and the dust of lost rivers, we arrive again at the eye, the center of circles, like a fingerprint pressed into the skin of the world. There are those who believe the eye is more than geological or mythic, that it is symbolic, a resonance point of the Earth's own geometry. Ancient builders, they argue, may have understood ley lines, the energetic meridians that connect sacred sites across continents. The pyramids of Giza, the megaliths of Stonehenge, the temples of Mexico, even the lost city beneath the waters of Yonaguni, all seem to fall along invisible arcs of mathematical harmony. The Rishat structure sits precisely on one of these intersections. To dismiss this as coincidence is easy. To explain it fully, less so. But if the Eye of the Sahara was indeed the navel of a forgotten world, what happened to its people? Geological evidence shows that around 12,000 years ago, a massive flood swept northward across this region. Ancient shorelines rise abruptly along the coasts of Mauritania and Morocco, suggesting a sudden influx of water, perhaps from the breaching of ice dams or the collapse of glacial lakes during the Younger Dryas. In the aftermath, desertification began. The climate shifted violently. Rivers dried, grasslands turned to sand. Any culture dependent on them would have vanished within centuries. Only myth would remain, a story of a kingdom consumed by the elements, preserved in memory until Plato gave it a name. Across the Mediterranean, the Greeks spoke of Atlas, the Titan who held up the sky. His daughters were the Hesperides, keepers of the golden apples of eternity. Their garden lay beyond the sunset, at the edge of the world. To them, the West was both promise and loss, a place where light descended and memory slept. Could this myth, too, be an echo of the same geography? The Atlas Mountains, the Atlantic Ocean, the Eye in the Sand, all bear his name. In a sense, Atlantis was never lost. It was hidden in plain sight, beneath the language of its own myth. Yet the story's meaning is deeper than its geography. Every civilization imagines its perfection, and in imagining it, creates its own Atlantis, a reflection of what it fears to lose. For the Greeks, it was virtue corrupted by pride. For us, it is knowledge untethered from wisdom. The cycle repeats because it is not history, but human nature. Atlantis may have perished once in water, but it perishes in every age that forgets the balance between creation and consequence. Modern explorers have begun to map the desert with radar and infrared satellites, tracing lost rivers and buried cities. What they find is staggering. Entire networks of settlements beneath the sand, some tens of thousands of years old. Circular enclosures, aligned to solstices, stone roads stretching for miles, wells that once drew water from aquifers now dry. If civilization truly resets, perhaps we are not its first architects, but its latest custodians. The earth erases, but never entirely. It buries, yet the pattern remains. At dusk, the Eye of the Sahara glows red, as if remembering fire. Wind moves through the concentric ridges like the echo of waves that no longer reach this shore. In the silence, one can almost hear the pulse of the old world, the sound of water, the hum of cities now dust. The horizon wavers, and for an instant, it seems as though the sand itself is breathing, waiting to be stirred awake. Atlantis may not lie beneath the sea, but beneath the mind, a memory folded into the geology of the soul. It waits for us not in discovery, but in recognition. Each time humanity rises to mastery and forgets humility, the circle tightens. The eye turns once more. The pattern repeats. And perhaps one day when the sands shift again and the waters return, another age will remember and begin the story anew. Until then, the desert sleeps, vast, patient, ancient, its spiral unbroken, its silence complete. And beneath that silence, a single question endures, carved not in stone, but in the rhythm of time itself. What if the heart of Atlantis has been staring at us all along, from the center of the Earth's forgotten eye? Beneath Antarctica's frozen silence lies a secret the world has barely begun to touch. 2 miles under the ice, beyond reach of sunlight, sonar reveals mountains, valleys, and vast plains that should not exist. When explorers first mapped these hidden contours in the 1950s, they found something that changed the way we saw the planet. An entire continent, the size of Europe, buried beneath a glacier. It was named for its position, the opposite Earth. And in that phrase, a shiver of recognition ran through the imagination of scholars and dreamers alike. What if the myth of Atlantis was not only about what sank, but what froze? Antarctica is the strangest of continents. It is the only place on Earth where time seems suspended, where the compass falters and maps lose meaning. But it was not always ice. Geological evidence shows that millions of years ago, it was a temperate land of forests and rivers. More startling still are hints that it may have been ice-free far more recently than we think. Ice core samples reveal a sudden and dramatic freeze, as if something shifted in the planet's axis. Could a rapid displacement of the Earth's crust have moved a thriving region into the polar circle, transforming civilization into legend overnight? In the mid-20th century, a controversial theory emerged known as crustal displacement. Charles Hapgood proposed that the outer shell of the Earth could slip over its molten core, shifting continents thousands of miles in a geological instant. Even Albert Einstein, cautious by nature, wrote a foreword supporting its plausibility. If such an event occurred 12,000 years ago, precisely the time Plato placed the fall of Atlantis, the consequences would have been catastrophic: global floods, volcanic eruptions, and the sudden freezing of entire continents. If Atlantis had existed on what is now Antarctica, it would explain both its disappearance and the recurring memory of a civilization destroyed by water and cold. The idea seems fantastical, yet cartographic anomalies persist. The Peary Race map, drawn in 1513, depicts the coastline of Antarctica beneath the ice with astonishing accuracy. Another, the Orontius Phineus map of 1531, shows the continent's rivers and mountain ranges as though surveyed from above. These maps, according to their creators, were copied from ancient sources. Modern geologists confirmed the contours match seismic data collected by radar in the 20th century. How could such knowledge exist centuries before the ice-penetrating technologies that revealed it? Unless, as Hapgood suggested, those maps preserved the memory of a world that had once seen Antarctica's true face, a world before the cataclysm. In 1938, a German expedition led by Alfred Richter flew over Queen Maud Land, photographing vast stretches of the icy plateau and marking an area they called Neuschwabenland. Rumors later claimed that Nazi explorers discovered warm, ice-free valleys and built secret bases there. Most of these stories belong to conspiracy, yet they are born from an unsettling kernel of truth. There are indeed pockets of geothermal heat beneath Antarctica's ice. Lakes sealed off for millions of years, such as Lake Vostok, contain microbial life, and perhaps evidence of what the Earth remembers. The continent's magnetic field is unusually unstable, as though something ancient lies beneath, altering the pulse of the poles. Some researchers have speculated that a massive buried structure, perhaps metallic, perhaps stone, exists under the ice near the Wilkes Land anomaly, detected by NASA satellites in 2006. The data suggests an enormous mass concentration, circular and deep, unlike any known geological feature. To orthodox science, it may be the remnant of an asteroid impact, but to others, it looks eerily like the outline of a city, vast, circular, and hidden beneath 2 miles of frozen time. If Atlantis was once here, entombed by the Earth's own movement, then perhaps its preservation is not loss, but protection. Legends from the world's farthest corners speak of the White Land, the Southern Lights, the city of the eternal dawn. The ancient Greeks called it Antarcticos, meaning opposite of the bear, the land beneath the constellation that never sets. The Hopi tell of a frozen kingdom where knowledge sleeps until the world is ready again. The Tibetan texts of Shambhala describe a hidden realm beneath the mountains, radiant with wisdom, shielded from the corruption of men. Could these myths point not to separate places, but to the same idea, a refuge of knowledge sealed away, awaiting a new age? If so, then perhaps Atlantis never died. It withdrew. It became the seed of memory beneath the ice, waiting for a time when humanity would again look inward rather than outward. In this light, the polar continent is not a grave, but a library, a mirror of the mind, buried until we are capable of reading it. And yet, to the human imagination, the frozen South has always been more than physical. It represents the edge of the known world, the border between consciousness and oblivion. The explorers who reached it, Shackleton, Amundsen, Scott, spoke of a strange presence there, a feeling that the world itself was watching. Some described phantom lights, shadows that moved without source, a silence so absolute it felt alive. In that silence, perhaps, lies what the ancients meant by the kingdom beneath. The idea of a hidden civilization beneath the ice might sound like fantasy, but science has begun to find echoes of its possibility. Subglacial radar scans have revealed entire mountain ranges, river systems, and vast freshwater lakes sealed from the atmosphere for millions of years. Within these enclosed ecosystems, life thrives, extramuffles feeding on minerals, generating heat, and producing methane. If life can persist there, untouched, what else could have endured? The pressure, the temperature, the isolation, all perfect for preservation. Fossils? Ruins? Or something more deliberate, something placed there long ago, awaiting rediscovery? In 2018, researchers drilling into Lake Mercer discovered microfossils and organic matter far younger than expected, some only a few thousand years old. This suggests that parts of Antarctica's surface may have been ice-free within human memory. Such evidence reopens the question, who or what might have lived there before the freeze? If an advanced culture once thrived in that brief interlude between ages, its remains could still rest beneath the glacier, intact, unreachable, waiting. Even mainstream historians admit that our timeline of civilization may be incomplete. Göbekli Tepe appeared from nowhere, fully formed, around 9600 BCE. Agriculture, architecture, astronomy, all emerged almost simultaneously in scattered regions of the world. It is as though humanity awoke with half-remembered knowledge after a long dream. Could that dream have been the memory of a world that perished beneath the ice? The philosopher Francis Bacon, in his final work, The New Atlantis, imagined an island in the Western Sea, home to a secret order of scientists who preserved all wisdom for the rebirth of humanity. He called their temple Salomon's House, and their motto was simple: "We shall restore all that is lost." To some, this was allegory for the Enlightenment. To others, it was prophecy, a whisper of an ancient lineage that remembered what the world had forgotten. Bacon's Atlantis may have been metaphorical, yet his dream reflects the same intuition that stirs in every age, that knowledge is cyclical, and that beneath every fall lies a seed of renewal. Antarctica is the planet's last mirror. It reflects nothing, yet it contains everything, a memory frozen beyond decay. Beneath its miles of ice, magnetic surveys reveal heat signatures that pulse like veins. The continent moves slightly each year, drifting toward the sea as if reaching for something. What if it is not merely ice that moves, but the memory within it, the slow awakening of the world's oldest archive? In the pale light of the southern dawn, the ice glows blue, like ancient glass. The air hums faintly, a resonance of wind and frozen salt. Somewhere below, locked in darkness, the first world may still sleep, not in ruins, but in equilibrium. Perhaps the Atlanteans knew that destruction is never total, that time itself preserves what consciousness cannot. Perhaps that is why the myth endures. Because deep down, we sense that what was lost is not gone, only waiting beneath the surface, intact and patient. And so the question turns from where to when. Not where was Atlantis, but when will it return? Not as land rising from water, but as memory surfacing through mind, a rediscovery of balance after another cycle of fire and flood. The ice shifts, groans, and settles again. The sun hovers just above the horizon, neither rising nor setting, caught in eternal dusk. In that half-light, the whole planet seems to hold its breath, as if listening to its own buried heart. Perhaps beneath all the ice, the first civilization never perished. It simply fell asleep. And when we have learned enough humility to listen through the noise of our own ambition, maybe the earth will whisper back through the voice of the poles, through the rhythm of the melt, through the quiet memory of the sea. Atlantis was never lost. It was only waiting for us to remember where to look. The ocean is not the only keeper of Atlantis. Some believe its reflection hides in the sky. For if the earth forgets, the stars remember. Their patterns shift so slowly that they become the truest archive of time. Long before written language, humanity built its myths upon constellations, Orion, Pleiades, Sirius, each one a chapter in an invisible story written across the heavens. What if those myths, the same ones repeated in Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Andes, were not inventions but coordinates, celestial memorials marking when the world turned over and a civilization vanished? Plato's dialogues described Atlantis as a kingdom aligned to cosmic order. Its temples reflected the movements of the heavens. Its rulers understood the geometry of the stars. This same knowledge resurfaces throughout the ancient world. The Great Pyramid is aligned within a fraction of a degree to true north. The Mayan observatories track Venus with an accuracy that rivals modern astronomy. Stonehenge captures the midsummer sunrise precisely through its central trilithon. Why did early builders, scattered across continents and centuries, obsess over such alignments? Perhaps they were not gazing upward for worship, but for remembrance, re-establishing the lost harmony between earth and sky that their ancestors once mastered. In the high desert of Peru, the Nazca lines stretch across the plateau, colossal figures only visible from above. Hummingbirds, spiders, serpents, and straight lines that run for miles. Archaeologists call them ritual pathways, but the scale suggests something more, an attempt to be seen from the heavens. Some believe they were messages to the gods, others maps of astronomical alignments. Yet one figure, often overlooked, bears strange significance, a spiral carved deep into the sand, resembling the same concentric pattern described by Plato for the city of Atlantis. Coincidence or continuity? The spiral recurs endlessly in nature, in galaxies, shells, storms, and in the ruins of ancient sites. It is the symbol of creation and return, the geometry of memory itself. When viewed from orbit, the pattern becomes clearer. The Nazca Plateau, the pyramids of Giza, the temples of Angkor, and the stone circles of Europe all sit upon a near-perfect great circle around the Earth, an equatorial line inclined 30 degrees from the modern equator. The odds of such alignment by chance are infinitesimal. Could this have been the true equator of a previous age, before the planet shifted on its axis? If so, these monuments may not be random relics but markers, waypoints left by an earlier civilization to trace its memory across the world. Like breadcrumbs through the labyrinth of time. The idea of a global civilization before history unsettles the foundations of archaeology. Yet scattered evidence keeps surfacing. Under Lake Titicaca, divers have found stone terraces and walls now submerged hundreds of feet below water. In the Gulf of Cambay, sonar revealed a city dated to 9500 BCE. Off Japan, the Yonaguni monument rises from the seafloor in perfect steps and right angles. And on the coast of Cuba, sonar imagery hints at vast symmetrical structures 2,000 feet beneath the waves. None are fully explained, and yet all share a strange unity: geometry, alignment, precision, and a sense that their builders understood both Earth and cosmos as a single fabric. The Maya believed that time was not linear but cyclical, that worlds rise and fall in great intervals they called baktuns, the end of one cycle, the beginning of another. Their calendar, misinterpreted as a prediction of apocalypse, was in fact a map of renewal. In their cosmology, the gods destroyed the previous world with water and rebuilt this one from its ashes. It was not destruction, but memory repeating, the ocean reclaiming, the stars reconfiguring. Perhaps Atlantis is not an anomaly, but a rhythm. Every few millennia, something resets. Climate, magnetism, consciousness, and what we call civilization is reborn with fragments of what came before. Magnetic reversal may hold a clue. Geophysicists have discovered that the Earth's magnetic poles have flipped repeatedly throughout history, often during periods of mass extinction and climate upheaval. Such reversals can weaken the planet's protective field, allowing cosmic radiation to alter weather, disrupt species, and even affect human cognition. Imagine a world watching the skies darken, compasses fail, storms rise, an age of wonder dissolving into chaos. For its survivors, the memory would live on, not as science, but as myth. The gods grew angry, the stars fell, the world was drowned. Atlantis by any other name. In ancient texts from Sumer and Egypt, there are references to the time when the stars changed their places. The Temple of Dendera in Egypt depicts the zodiac of the first time, constellations arranged as they would have appeared around 10,500 BCE. That date again? The age when Orion's belt aligned with the pyramids, when the Sphinx faced Leo, when glaciers melted and floods reshaped continents. Could all of these alignments, astronomical, geological, mythical, be different languages describing the same event? To some, Atlantis was a technological marvel. To others, a spiritual civilization, one that mastered not machines, but consciousness itself. Esoteric traditions speak of Atlantean temples of sound, where energy was generated through resonance rather than combustion. Recent experiments in acoustic levitation show that sound can indeed move matter, suspending objects in mid-air using vibration alone. Perhaps the ancients were not performing rituals, but engineering. The difference between science and magic is only the distance between understanding and forgetting. Modern archaeology may scoff, but the traces remain. The unfinished obelisk at Aswan shows drill marks in granite that seem to spiral with mechanical precision. The tunnel walls at Baalbek bear patterns of vibration, as though shaped by sonic waves rather than chisels. Across the Andes, megaliths fit together so tightly that centuries of earthquakes have failed to shift them. How did they do it? To ask the question is to reopen the doorway to Atlantis, not a place, but a level of mastery where technology and nature were one. If Atlantis truly existed, its destruction was not the end of knowledge, but its scattering. Each fragment became a seed. The geometry of Egypt, the astronomy of the Maya, the philosophy of Greece, the mysticism of India. Together they form a mosaic of what once was whole. The ancient mystery schools, Eleusis, Alexandria, Nalanda, all spoke of a knowledge from before the flood. Even the Bible carries the echo. There were giants in the earth in those days. Perhaps those giants were not beings of size, but of understanding. Minds vast enough to shape matter with thought, to carve harmony into stone. And yet, all that survives are ruins, myths, and longing. The stars we see tonight are the same that watched Atlantis drown, but we no longer remember what they meant. We measure their light in distance, not in meaning. We calculate, but we do not listen. Somewhere along the way, we replaced awe with analysis, forgetting that they are the same thing expressed differently. Still, the rhythm continues. The procession of the equinoxes ticks forward. The poles drift, the seas rise once more. The story replays. Every age believes itself eternal until the tide reminds it otherwise. Perhaps that is Atlantis's true purpose, to teach that nothing built upon pride can endure, but everything built upon memory can return. In recent years, scientists studying ancient DNA discovered something remarkable. Genetic traces linking distant cultures once thought isolated. A thread connects the Basques of Europe to the Berbers of North Africa, the Guanches of the Canary Islands to indigenous South Americans. Shared markers, carried by ocean currents and time. It is as if, long before recorded history, a seafaring people had woven humanity together only for the sea to unweave it again. Could this have been the Atlanteans, their blood still pulsing quietly in our veins? If so, then we are not separate from them. We are their echo. Their story is ours, repeating through millennia. We have rebuilt towers of light, machines that pierce the heavens, networks that span the globe. Yet we stand again on the edge of imbalance, our knowledge vast, our wisdom thin. The same stars that guided them watch us now, silent and patient. Perhaps they remember what we have not yet learned, that civilizations do not end. They transform, they submerge, they wait. Far above the ocean the night thickens, the constellations wheel slowly, indifferent and eternal. Beneath them the waves move as they always have, erasing, revealing, erasing again. Somewhere between them lies the story of Atlantis, not in the water, not in the sky, but in the space between, where remembrance and forgetting meet. And as dawn begins to bloom over the horizon, one final thought lingers, fragile as light itself. Maybe the stars were never gods or guides at all. Maybe they are simply mirrors, and in their reflection we are watching Atlantis rise again, within us. There are places where history thins, where the veil between past and present trembles like heat above sand. One such place lies deep beneath the waves, off the western coast of Cuba, where sonar once caught the faint outline of something vast and deliberate. In 2001, a Canadian research vessel mapping the ocean floor stumbled upon geometric patterns, stone formations in symmetrical grids, rising from a depth of nearly 2,000 feet. The images, grainy and distorted by pressure, showed what looked like pyramids, roads, and circular plazas, a drowned city the size of Manhattan. For a moment, the world turned its eyes toward the Caribbean, whispering a name that refuses to die. Atlantis. The site has never been confirmed. Political barriers, oceanic depths, and the silence of the sea have kept it sealed. But the coordinates linger in archives, and the sonar data remains unexplained. Geologists say it could be volcanic rock formations, fractured by tectonic movement. Yet the structures sit upon what appears to be an ancient shoreline, a line that would have been above sea level at the end of the last ice age. If it truly was land then, and if stone once stood there, the memory of Atlantis may lie not beneath myth, but beneath sediment. It is fitting that the Caribbean should hold such a secret. This region, where the Atlantic breathes into the Gulf, is shaped by unseen currents, the meeting of warm and cold, of light and depth. It is a crossroads, a mirror of the myth itself. The Maya, who lived not far north, spoke of a drowned land called Aztlan, birthplace of gods and ancestors. The Aztecs traced their lineage to that same origin. Their word for it, Aztlan, Atl, water, may be the oldest linguistic remnant of the name Atlantis itself. Ancient sailors, long before Columbus, may have known these waters. The Phoenicians, masters of navigation, spoke of voyages westward to the islands of the blessed. The Carthaginians, according to Roman texts, discovered lush islands beyond the Atlantic and forbade further travel there, fearing colonization. Perhaps these were the Antilles, or perhaps the last surviving peaks of a sunken world. In the myths of the Caribbean, the gods come not from heaven but from the sea, bringing fire and music, only to vanish when men grew forgetful. It is a rhythm older than empire, older even than story. But the ocean hides more than ruins. It hides a silence we rarely name, the amnesia of civilization. Every age believes it begins at zero, that it is the first to master stone or sky. Yet beneath each triumph lies the faint outline of another, erased by flood or flame. Our maps stretch forward, never backward, as though to look too far behind would undo us. But the ocean remembers. It carries within its tides the minerals of vanished mountains, the silt of forgotten plains, the bones of all who dreamed before us. Modern science, in its precision, has begun to find what myth always knew, that the sea is both womb and tomb. In recent decades, underwater archaeology has uncovered entire landscapes, riverbeds beneath the English Channel, villages off the coast of India, forests drowned beneath the Baltic. The more we map the seabed, the smaller the world becomes, and the larger history grows. If civilization did exist before the flood, then the story of humanity must be rewritten not as a single ascent, but as a recurring dawn. Still, the question persists. What happened? How could an advanced culture vanish so completely? The answer may lie in the skies, not the sea. Around 12,800 years ago, the Earth was struck by fragments of a disintegrating comet, a swarm of cosmic fire that ignited the atmosphere and melted the ice caps. Scientists now call it the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. Layers of microdiamonds and iridium found across continents testify to that celestial assault. Fire rained upon glaciers, oceans rose, species vanished. In the myths of every culture, it survives as the flood, the fire, the end. Atlantis may have been the name the survivors gave to the world before. To imagine that loss is to feel the weight of silence, cities vanishing beneath boiling seas, forests turning to ash, knowledge dissolving with its keepers. What fragments remained were carried by wanderers, the seed-bearers of the next age. They became the builders of megaliths, the founders of temples, the teachers of stars. The Atlanteans, if they lived, did not die in vain. They became us. And yet, even as we rediscover the mechanisms of the cosmos, we repeat the same mistake: to believe knowledge is power rather than responsibility. Plato's warning remains unheeded. The Atlanteans, he wrote, grew arrogant, believing themselves greater than the gods. They harnessed the forces of nature, bent them to their will, and in doing so unbalanced the world. It was not the sea that destroyed them, but their own reflection upon it. They built mirrors so perfect they forgot what they were for. Our world, gleaming with circuitry and light, stands upon that same precipice. We can summon storms, split atoms, alter genes. We speak to satellites as though to stars, and still the sea rises, ice melts, storms gather, the planet remembers what we have forgotten. The flood returns, not as myth, but as measurement. Each year the tide creeps closer to our cities, whispering the same message that drowned Atlantis, that no civilization stands above the laws of balance. In some ways, Atlantis is not past, but prophecy. The pattern is the same: expansion, mastery, excess, fall. But if the cycle repeats, it may also teach. For in every myth of destruction lies the seed of rebirth. The flood purifies, the fire renews, the memory buried becomes the wisdom reborn. Perhaps the lesson of Atlantis is not tragedy, but return, a reminder that what we call loss is only transformation. In the ruins of Akrotiri, ash still preserves the color of lilies painted 4,000 years ago. In the jungles of Guatemala, satellites trace the grid of cities swallowed by trees. In Antarctica, beneath 2 miles of ice, mountains lie shaped like forgotten temples. And somewhere beneath the Caribbean, a pattern of stone waits for light. Each is a mirror of the same truth. The world forgets nothing. It simply waits for us to remember how to see. There is an ancient Sufi saying, "The water takes the shape of the vessel that holds it." Civilization, too, is like water. It changes form, but not essence. Every collapse is a pouring, every age a new cup. The Atlanteans may have poured themselves into us, into our language, our myths, our yearning for the unknown. We are their continuation, dreaming of what they once knew. At dusk, the Caribbean glows like molten glass. The water holds the sun in its reflection, a second world trembling beneath the first. The horizon burns, and for an instant the sea seems to lift, as if remembering what it once carried. Somewhere down there, perhaps under coral and centuries, the geometry of Atlantis still sleeps. Columns aligned to stars that no longer exist, streets paved with light. Or perhaps not. Perhaps it was never stone at all, but consciousness, the architecture of awareness itself, drowned beneath the noise of survival. If that is true, then Atlantis does not need to be found. It needs to be awakened. Every act of creation, every search for meaning, every question that reaches beyond its answer is part of that awakening. The myth is a compass, not a map. It points inward, not outward. And at its center lies the oldest truth of all, that nothing real is ever lost. The night falls, and the sea quiets. The waves move as they have for millennia, whispering the same syllables against the shore. Wind brushes through palm leaves like the turning of forgotten pages. The stars rise, the same stars the Atlanteans once watched, and their light touches the water like memory returning. Perhaps somewhere in that shimmer we can still glimpse them, not as gods, not as ghosts, but as ancestors, standing on a shoreline that has no end, watching as the tide withdraws and the world begins again. For the sea does not erase. It writes, and in its endless motion it carries a single refrain, soft and certain as a heartbeat beneath the deep. Atlantis was never destroyed. It became the ocean itself. The story of Atlantis ends where it began, in silence. After centuries of speculation, excavation, denial, and dreaming, the myth returns to what it always was, a mirror for the human condition. Beneath the ocean, or beneath memory, its presence lingers, patient as the tides. And yet to speak of endings is misleading. Atlantis by its nature is circular, a spiral, a recurrence. Every discovery, every collapse, every reawakening brings us closer to what it represents. Not a place, but a state of consciousness. Some say that when Plato wrote of Atlantis, he was not preserving a history, but foretelling a future. His description of a civilization that rose to mastery, grew proud, and fell by its own design was as much prophecy as allegory. In his time, Athens stood radiant and arrogant, certain of its permanence. In ours, the same certainty hums beneath the glow of screens, satellites, and engines. The scale has changed, but the rhythm has not. The same waves that swallowed Atlantis now rise against our own shores. The sea is not vengeful. It simply remembers what balance feels like. For all our progress, we remain children of the same planet that gave and took before. Our towers may be taller, our reach greater, but the law of cycles endures. In the eyes of eternity, we are only another story the earth tells itself before the next tide comes. And yet, there is something in us that resists finality. The same impulse that drives us to search the ocean floor, to decode ice cores and forgotten scripts, to stare into the abyss and whisper, "Where did we come from?" Perhaps that longing itself is the voice of Atlantis, calling us home. For if it truly existed, it was not a city of stone, but a civilization of understanding, one that saw no divide between spirit and science, between earth and star. Its loss was not only physical, but moral, the sundering of knowledge from reverence. We can still hear faint traces of that unity in the world's oldest traditions. In Egypt's Hermetic texts, it is said that as above, so below, as within, so without. In the Vedas, the universe is a single breath, inhaled and exhaled by the eternal. In the teachings of Pythagoras, numbers are sacred, their harmony the essence of all being. These ideas are not inventions, they are survivals, embers of a worldview that once burned bright before the deluge. Atlantis, then, is not behind us. It is beneath us, within us, scattered through time like seeds waiting for fertile soil. There are moments when those seeds stir. Each time humanity rediscovers the deep interconnection of life, the lost world rises a little. Each time we build not for dominance but for harmony, we move closer to what the Atlanteans may have known. For if the myth teaches anything, it is that knowledge without humility devours itself. A civilization that forgets reverence invites its own undoing. The Atlanteans fell because they could no longer tell the difference between creation and control. Perhaps the same whisper now passes through our machines, through our data, through our endless acceleration, a quiet plea to remember where power ends and wonder begins. Modern explorers search for Atlantis in sonar maps, satellite scans, and sediment cores. But perhaps the true excavation is inward. The ocean's depths are only a metaphor for the unconscious, that vast interior sea where memory sleeps. Dreams of lost cities, luminous beings, and golden ages are not fantasies. They are reflections of what humanity feels it has misplaced: innocence, balance, awe. To rediscover Atlantis is to reclaim those states of being. The myth is less about archaeology than psychology, the recovery of a forgotten equilibrium between intellect and soul. Consider the rhythm of the world today. The glaciers retreat, the seas advance, fires rage, storms reconfigure coastlines. We live once again in an age of rising waters. Our technologies, like Atlantean temples, glitter with promise and peril. Artificial intelligence, genetic design, quantum power, all tools that could either illuminate or consume. In each invention lies a mirror of the myth. The question is not whether Atlantis existed, but whether we will repeat its story or rewrite it. What would it mean to learn the lesson without reliving the fall? To build a civilization that remembers not only how to rise, but when to bow? Perhaps it begins with listening, to the planet, to each other, to the silence beneath the noise. For silence is what remains when all illusions of mastery dissolve. It is the language of the deep, the same that once spoke to Plato through Egyptian priests, and to them through older voices still. The earth doesn't speak in words, but in balance, in the subtle dialogue between creation and collapse. When we cease to listen, it corrects us. When we remember, it guides. In the end, Atlantis is both caution and invitation. It warns that no empire is unsinkable, and yet it also invites us to imagine what could be reclaimed if we built differently. Its myth endures because it speaks to something elemental in us, the yearning to begin again, but better. Beneath the rubble of every fall lies the blueprint of renewal. Perhaps the next civilization, the one already forming from our collective crisis, will be the true return of Atlantis, not as a city, but as a consciousness that honors both reason and reverence. There is an ancient belief found in esoteric texts that Atlantis never truly perished. Its essence, they say, was preserved in hidden sanctuaries, the Himalayas, the Andes, the deep ocean trenches, guarded by those who remember. Whether or not this is literal hardly matters. The guardians are metaphorical, artists, thinkers, mystics, scientists who seek harmony rather than conquest. In each of them, Atlantis lives, a quiet current beneath the surface of history, shaping the flow of human thought. Perhaps that current has always been there, guiding our rediscoveries. When Newton saw gravity in an apple's fall, when Einstein traced light through the curvature of space, when an archaeologist brushes dust from a stone carved by forgotten hands, these are moments when the old knowledge stirs. We call them breakthroughs, but they are really recollections. The universe reveals itself not to the conqueror, but to the listener. And maybe that is the final paradox, that Atlantis never drowned at all. It dissolved into us, into our myths, our equations, our music, our longing for what is whole. Every act of creation is a resurfacing, every act of understanding a fragment rising through the waves. We are the continuation of the dream, carrying its pulse forward through the centuries. Outside, the world moves toward another dawn. Somewhere, the tide retreats across a quiet shore. The sea, in its eternal patience, reveals shapes in the sand, circles, channels, faint spirals that vanish with the next wave. They could be patterns of tide or memory. The horizon glows faintly, as though the sun itself remembers. Perhaps, in the end, Atlantis was never meant to be found. Perhaps its purpose was to teach that nothing truly sacred can be possessed, only remembered, honored, and lived. The city of light, the empire of balance, the civilization before time, all are mirrors showing us what we could be again. The myth will outlive us. It will whisper through ruins and rise again in other forms, as legend, as warning, as promise. And each time the flood returns, the earth will ask us, softly but unmistakably, "Do you remember yet?" The sea will listen, the wind will wait, and somewhere, beneath or within, the lost city will breathe again, not in stone, but in the heart that finally learns to listen.